Disequilibrium caused by a shift. Let's take a look. So what we already know, so we've already looked at the demand curve, how it's downward sloping, consumers' willingness and ability to consume is shown on that line. With the supply curve, we know it's upward sloping and shows the business's willingness and ability to produce on that line. So the point where the demand and supply curve meets is called the equilibrium point. An equilibrium is a situation where there is no surplus or shortage in the market. So you should already know all this stuff. If not, I suggest you go back and review it before you continue on. Key points. Oh, what happened there? So again, we're still continuing on from the last key knowledge point from the area study 2 of unit 1, economics. So effects of changes in demand and supply on equilibrium prices and quantities. Alright, how a market returns to equilibrium when prices are too low. So this point here is known as disequilibrium, and as we expand the supply curve and contract the demand curve, we return to the equilibrium point. So this is how we go from disequilibrium to equilibrium. So prices rise because of a bidding war till eventually we get to a point where we hit equilibrium. Same when prices are too high. We have a disequilibrium here where we have a surplus. So there's 800 available, but there's only 200 units being demanded. Prices will keep dropping till supply contracts and demand expands to a point where it's about $10 and 500 units is the equilibrium point. So we've gone back and reviewed what we covered last lesson. Now let's go on to some new stuff. So factors of demand. These are all things that you should remember. Levels of disposable income, available substitutes, changes in complementary goods, changes in preferences and tastes, changes in interest rates, changes in population size, changes in consumer confidence or sentiment, changes in business confidence or sentiment, changes made by the government. These are all factors of demand, non-price factors that cause a shift. So depending if it's a positive or negative shift, it'll have a different impact on our demand and supply diagram, changing from disequilibrium to equilibrium. Let's take a look. So positive demand shift. So how we get from D1 to D2. This could be stuff like increase in disposable income, an increase in consumer confidence, change in tastes and preferences, all these sort of things that has an increase in the demand. That's not a price factor. Will cause it to shift to the right. So as you can see, at the original price at P1, you'll see that supply, this line here, is originally supplying 500 units, but demand is now at 700 units. So if we have 700 units being demanded but only 500 being supplied, we definitely have a shortage of 200 units. So what occurs? Looking back to what we covered previously in the last PowerPoint slide, because there's a shortage, a bidding war would occur. So what will happen is supply would expand because producers now realize that they could make more money if they produce more units. At the same time, demand will contract because as prices rise, they're less willing and able to consume. So as this occurs, this demand contracting, this supply expanding, they'll eventually hit a point where they hit the new equilibrium, where there's no shortage or surplus at 600 units, and the price will now be $12 in this theoretical model. So sequence of events, just like before, a shortage occurs, quantity demand is greater than quantity supplied, a bidding war occurs as too many people chasing too few goods pushes prices upwards. As prices rise, demand contracts and supply expands following their laws. Prices will continue to rise until they hit the new equilibrium point where there's no shortage or surplus occurring. So negative demand shift, returning to equilibrium. So how do we get from D1 to D2? This could be due to a drop in disposable income, increased levels of unemployment. What else could happen? Well, those are two things I can think of right now. It could be a change in taste and preferences where people do not want to have bananas anymore because maybe, I don't know, apples are the cool new thing. Anything like that. So demand has negatively been impacted, and to show a negative impact, it's shifted to the left. Because now for any given price, they're willing to consume less. So in this case, what happens? Well, at the original price of $10, demand is now at 300 units, while supply is still supplying 500 units. So we have a surplus of 200 units. When we have a surplus, firms will stop producing and start reducing the amount they produce, and drop the prices as a result in order to get rid of the excess stock they have. So you'll find that the prices will drop down to $8, while demand will expand because as prices drop, consumers are more willing and able to consume. This will keep occurring until they hit that new equilibrium point of $8, where we do not have a surplus or a shortage. So again, sequence of events. I don't think I need to go over this. Take a read. Pause the video if you need to read through it. So now let's look at the factors of supply. We've got changes in the cost of production, changes in technology, changes in productivity, changes in climatic conditions, and lastly, changes in government intervention. All these factors here can cause the supply line to shift left or right, depending if it's positive or negative. So for a positive supply shift, so where our supply line goes to the right from S1 to S2, where they're more willing and able to supply at any given price. So here they're originally willing to supply 500 at $10. Now they're willing to supply 700 at $10. So let's look at some factors. A factor could be cheaper cost of production. Because it's more cheaper to produce, they're more willing and able to produce more units. Another condition could be better climatic conditions. So let's just say every economy is doing well. They're more optimistic. They're more willing and able to produce more goods and services. Other things could be the environment. If you're a farmer, if all of a sudden you have a good ton of rain that comes in and you have larger crop yields than ever before, you're now willing to supply more at any given price. So those are a few examples here. So what happens when supply shifts to the right? Well, you're going to realize that demand is going to expand while supply contracts. Why? It's because at the original price of $10, you're going to realize that the quantity supplied is 700, while demand is still sitting at 500. So what's going to occur is what? A surplus, because we have 200 extra units we cannot get rid of. So in order to sustain business and for consumers to keep consuming and there's no surplus left available, firms will discount the price till they reach a new equilibrium point of 600 units, and consumers will keep consuming to the point where they hit it at $8 and they're consuming 600 units. So in the end, what will happen is supply will contract, demand will expand till they hit the new equilibrium point where there's no wastage in the economy. Again, look at the sequence of events. Surplus occurs, products are discounted, puts downward pressure on price. As prices fall, demand expands, supply contracts, and you'll hit a new equilibrium point where there's no shortage or surplus. In this case, the new equilibrium point is a larger quantity and a lower price. So what happens in this case here, where there's a negative supply, where supply shifts to the right, to the left? What causes them to be less willing and able to supply at any given price? Well, it could be things like increased cost of production, adverse weather conditions like a drought where they cannot produce as much as they could before. Could be economic conditions that happen overseas that's causing supply to shift to the left. Could also be some form of government intervention which has restricted their ability to produce goods and services. A good example might be an excise tax. So if they put a tax on cigarettes, it reduces the willingness of firms to produce those goods and services because now it costs, the profits are not there as they used to be because now the cost of productions have increased. So what happens? In this case, when supply shifts to the left, we're going to realize that demand is still at 500 at the original price, while quantity supplied is at 300. So we have a shortage of about 200 units. What happens when we have a shortage? Well, a bidding war occurs, supply will expand while demand will contract until they hit the new equilibrium point of 400 units at $12. Again, you can look at the summary sequence of events. So if you get a chance, please copy down the diagrams on page 102 and then complete the review questions 3.8 that covers the two topics that we've covered in the last two PowerPoint slides, just to make sure you guys are understanding what's going on. Next lesson, we might look at some real life examples like COVID-19 and how it impacts supply and demand. Until then, if you have any questions, feel free to holler. See you later.